afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you may have tuned in. Welcome to today's Information Week webinar, Identifying Blind Spots Through External Attack Surface Management, sponsored by BitSite and broadcast by Informa. I'm Terry Sweeney with Information Week. I'll be your moderator today. Just a few quick announcements before we start. This webinar, of course, is designed to be interactive. That dock of widgets you see at the bottom of your screen will allow you to learn about today's speakers, download resources, and share this webinar on social media. If you've been here before, you know that this is also where you'll participate in the Q&A session that takes place at the end of today's presentation. Slides will advance automatically throughout the event. You can also download a copy of the slides using the resources widget. Toward the end of the webinar, we'll be asking you to provide feedback by clicking on that survey widget found at the bottom of the screen. Please take a minute to fill this out before you leave us today. Your feedback helps us provide great information on how to improve future events. Lastly, if you're experiencing any technical problems, please click the help widget at the bottom of the screen. You can also type your issue into the Q&A area, and we'll be glad to offer one-on-one assistance. So let's move on to today's presentation, Identifying Blind Spots Through External Attack Surface Management. Discussing today's topic is Olivia Bilodeau, Senior Product Marketing Manager at BitSite. She's joined by her colleague, Brian Mulligan, Vice President of Product Security Performance Management, also from BitSite. To learn more about both speakers, you can find their bios in the speaker bio box on your screen. And again, if you want to ask our speakers any questions, please use the Q&A box that's on the right side of the screen. Olivia, I'll hand it over to you now.
That sounds great. Thanks, Terry. And hi, everyone. It's great to be with you today. As Terry mentioned, my name's Olivia. Brian and I are here to talk all about identifying blind spots through EASM. The long version of that is External Attack Surface Management. But again, if you hear us refer to EASM. We're really excited to be here today. We're going to talk a lot about digital footprints, trends in the market, being aware of what an attacker may see, how to get on top of those blind spots, and much more. So to quickly show you our agenda, I'm going to talk and review a couple of relevant market trends. We're going to go through some key challenges, then really get into the meat of how to overcome those challenges and end with a summary. Feel free, as Terry said, to drop questions in the chat. We will likely be answering questions at the end. All right, so getting into market trends, what we're seeing in the market and also hearing from our customers is that there are challenges staying on top of your digital footprints. And there's a lot of factors that are influencing this growth when it comes to your digital footprint, your attack surface expanding. You think of some factors like the pandemic that really spurred that people going more and more to technology. But also, when you just think about companies expanding, people and teams introducing and using more tools throughout the company, there are a lot of factors at play. And so you'll notice what I have here in front of us, a couple of stats to showcase. Ransomware is expected to cost its victims around $265 billion annually by 2031. And almost 70% of organizations have experienced some type of cyber attack in which the attack itself started through the exploit of an unknown, unmanaged, or poorly managed internet-facing asset. So again, that really goes to that concept of what could an attacker see and where might you be vulnerable? And if you don't have the right visibility and insight to that, it's just something that's really critical to put that focus on. So moving into some common challenges that we see related to managing your attack surface. I'll go through them quickly. It's challenging to identify and classify asset data to actually build that digital footprint and give you that full visibility. Then there's a layer of needing to actually analyze exposure and see where you're vulnerable within that footprint. Then, it's really important and can be quite difficult sometimes to prioritize and actually do that remediation work to reduce the exposure. And then there's a factor in terms of managing this, this concept of the extended attack surface. So not only in terms of your organization, but what about the vendors in your vendor ecosystem that you're working with? So with that, I'm actually going to pass it over to Brian, and he's going to start to get into some of the information about how we overcome these challenges.
Okay, thanks, Olivia. Great to be here with everybody today. So the first step to help to overcome these challenges is really understanding where your assets are, what are your assets, and how they're disposed. I think if you work at IT or you work in security and somebody comes up to you and says, what does your asset inventory look like? Or how confident are you in your asset inventory? Or what's your strategy with regards to things like a CMDB? In my experience, most people asking those questions, especially at larger organizations, are greeted with some kind of a nervous laughter. Like, oh, we have a system, but we know where it's not working today, or we have a system, but it works for everybody except for this particular business unit. Or we have a system, but we're having a hard time, or we have two systems, and we're having a hard time reconciling between those systems. And so we found those to be very common challenges that many organizations are working through. And so identifying and classifying assets is a difficult first step. That's where external attack surface, that's the first place that external attack surface management can really help, because using a tool that's looking externally, you get kind of a double check on all of the efforts you have internally to triage, assess, and collate a list of your attack surface of all of your assets. At BitSight, we've been doing this for 12 or 13 years. We've gathered a tremendous amount of information across the internet. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the kind of information we've gathered and how we gather it. But truly, there are two kinds of information fundamentally that we look at. One is we call kind of the who data. That's saying this asset, this IP address, or this domain belongs to this organization. We have the data to rate 40 million and 40 million organizations. We have 400,000 highly curated, meaning in addition to our automated process, manually reviewed. I'll talk more about that. Entity maps or ratings today. And that's all infrastructure that we've identified about organizations globally. That's all infrastructure that if you become a BitSight customer, you log in on day one, that's all presented to you, nicely organized and ready to take action on or reconcile with your own account keeping. We add to that the what data, which is really the security observations or the information we see about those assets. So once you know what the assets are, the next important question is, what kind of shape are they in? How secure are they? Do I have active exposures available? This is useful information on an ongoing basis to help to improve the performance of your controls. It's also useful information in those situations that we all get into when there's a critical security vulnerability and you're trying to triage and get a response to understand what the extent of your exposure is. It can help supplement the systems you're already using and make sure you have that cohesive outside-in external view that will often catch blind spots. The what data we have is really is tremendous. We collect data on the entire internet. We have sinkhole infrastructure to collect information about compromised systems and other information that will help give you a really cohesive picture of your assets and what's going on with them from a security perspective. So drilling in on the who data and why it's important. This is a multi-step process that you get the benefit of, and it starts with automated asset discovery. So we take some information, say, when we're going to create these ratings, or we're going to collect this attack surface management information. We start by running an automated process to discover all of the domains and IP addresses that we think belong to an organization. We then refine that process with a large team of researchers who hand curate these footprints. What that allows us to do, the hand curation, largely is create these organizational trees. And so you can see on the slide here, there's a picture of kind of a tree hierarchy. And so we take each organization that we're going to measure the attack surface on. We create a top level organization, and then we break down below that, different subsidiaries, different business units, different geographies that we can see, we can collect information on separately, and we can combine together into the assessment of the whole organization. So this allows us to help take a large problem, which is, there's a major multinational company that has a lot of infrastructure across the world, and break it down into pieces, each one more manageable. It also allows us to run the automation more confidently. So this hand curation happens, and then our automation can continue running forward off of that to discover new assets and to update these assets, these views of organizations when the data changes, when you stop using an IP address or you start using a domain. We can detect that, and we'll update the attack surface information. This tree structure also is really powerful in allowing our customers to align the external attack surface collection and the subsequent remediation action with their business and with their business objectives. And so with this organizational tree structure, you can say, okay, this person's a business unit information security officer, this person runs this data center or network segment, and they can have their own area. So these are all the findings, these are all the observations we have on that area, and that person can be responsible for owning those and triaging them and remediating them where appropriate. It also allows you to perform measurement. So if you want to have tracking and measurement of different teams across the organization, you can easily do that and see not only how the individual teams are performing, but how the individual teams impact the exposure of the whole organization. And that's all facilitated by this concept of an organization's tree. Once you have visibility into the assets, you can learn a lot just by the information that's available on those assets collected externally. And so you can see here our asset listing. You can see the asset IP address. You're able to customize it with tags to help to organize your information. You can see an estimate of the asset importance, the geography of the asset, the services that are available, the hosting providers. Is this asset running in AWS or Microsoft's cloud or Google Cloud Platform? And then you can see a summary of the findings and what we found on the asset from a security perspective. Are there things you need to worry about? Just this information can be used to help triage, to help prioritize, to help discover technologies you didn't know you were using. We often have situations where we're giving a demo to a new prospect and we show this information and say, gee, I have 50 IPs in Microsoft Azure. We're a Google Cloud Platform shop. I really want to understand what those IPs are and what they're doing here. And that's a really useful benefit right out of the gates. We also get a change feed. So one of the most important things about any infrastructure, and one of the reasons it's so hard to keep an asset list up to date, is because it's constantly changing. Things are adding and removing all the time. And you get a clean view of that here as we're detecting new IPs added or domains added or domains removed that are no longer yours. You can get a feed on that. You can see what the security configuration looks like on newly discovered IPs and so forth. So once you've got the asset list, so once you have the foundational, we think this is your asset structure, there's a lot we can help with to identify exposures and vulnerabilities. And this is the next process. So if you have the list, you have the assets, you want to know, okay, what can I learn from these assets and how can I use this to help reduce my exposure immediately? There's three kind of categories of information. One is general like asset descriptor information. I mentioned some of that before. That's things like location, hosting provider. It's saying we have this asset. Here's what we know about it. Then we have two categories which are more like security observations and security KPIs. So there's some governance metrics which we provide around the bit site rating, which is a measure of how likely the organization is to have a security event. That breaks down into what we call risk vectors, which are different areas of security, some of which are listed in the next section, where we have KPIs that score each of those areas to help demonstrate progress and set goals for teams working within the external attack surface management platform. And then there are control metrics. And so we've taken all of the data on the right here and mapped it into control frameworks in order to say, given what we see here in this attack surface, here's how we think controls are performing, and here's how you think, here's where we think you might have opportunity to improve the control and get meaningful risk reduction. All of that is built on this foundation of exposure metrics, and exposure metrics and observations are kind of the fundamental building block of the platform, and they break into a number of different categories. So there's vulnerabilities, which are your typical like CVEs. There's this piece of software is vulnerable to this problem, or maybe vulnerable to this problem. There's a category of observations we call diligence, or you can think about this as configuration or kind of hygiene. Like, are the systems that we can detect optimally configured? Are the ports secured? Are the TLS, transport security configurations up to best practices, and not using older versions of the security? We find in a lot of these things a tremendous correlation to bad security outcomes. So if you're each one of these things on their own from a configuration perspective may not be the end of the world, but we find that companies that kind of have problems in these areas are more likely to have security events in the end. So these things in total are very important. We've analyzed website configurations and how a website is configured and what the security settings look like on the web application. We have a category of findings around compromised systems. This is evidence that there's software, there's code, malicious code running within the organization. So that there's a botnet infection, or there's other malware, or there's potentially unwanted sort of like grayware that's been detected running inside the organization and connecting out to the command and control servers that organize and control those kinds of activities. This is a very powerful sign, not just because you have an infected machine, but it means that likely that several controls failed. So within a lot of organizations, you'll have an EDR, endpoint detection and response solution, that will catch this kind of thing. If we have a machine in your organization that's infected, it means that the EDR didn't succeed in blocking this behavior. It means that if there was network level security controls that were designed to prevent malware from propagating, those controls didn't work because we detected this externally. So this connection cut back out onto the internet. So a very powerful measure of exposure there. User behavior is really around users in the network conducting file sharing activity. A huge percentage of the file sharing activity that goes on includes malware, along with whatever the movie or pirated software that the user's trying to download. And then we have some information which indicates past exposures and breaches, things that have been publicly disclosed, and some threat intelligence, lightweight threat intelligence, things like exposed credentials. So are there credentials, are there email addresses with your organization's domains available on the internet in various breaches? And that's useful to think about. It's useful to be aware of in terms of knowing when you may be the target of an attack, and ensuring that you have things like multi-factor authentication in place to prevent that from succeeding. So from that kind of those two major underlying data sets, we can bring a lot of analytics that help to make sense of that, especially across a large organization. So we provide analysis like this geographic footprint. So you can see where you have concentration of IP addresses geographically. This is often very interesting immediately, because most people have some idea of where they do business or where they expect to see things on this map. And if there are things elsewhere, that those are assets that are worth looking into further from an unknown exposure or unknown attack surface point of view. You can summarize by any of the other kind of asset metadata. So you can look at hosting providers, say, and compare AWS to Microsoft Azure cloud environments, and look at like what the rate of findings and security configurations look like between those two environments. You can look at different software products that are in use, and that's could be really useful, not only from a security perspective, but from like an IT management perspective, and making sure that there's not needless duplication, or identifying opportunities where you can consolidate onto particular platforms. And this is all available in a nice dashboard that aggregates all of the detailed information that I described earlier. So from all of these dashboards, you can drill right into the specific asset with the specifics of the observation. We have a module that focuses just on vulnerabilities and looks at vulnerabilities detected within the organization. Both. So this is like looking at a CVE and saying we see this CVE on the system within your organization. There's a bunch of different granularity that goes along with this. We have CVSS scoring to help prioritize based on severity. We also have a range of detection mechanisms, from kind of the confirmed detection, like this system is vulnerable, to this system is running software which may be vulnerable, which can help the triage and shorten the list of places that you might want to look if you're investigating a particular vulnerability. Olivia is going to talk more about this in a minute, but this is also very powerful because you can take this same vulnerability framework and apply it not just to your own organization, but through your entire vendor network.
That's great, Brian.
Hand it off here to Olivia.
Yeah, I'll jump into it. So everyone, you've probably been following along as Brian's been walking through, but if we step back for a moment, what we've shown so far is you now have your view, your digital footprint is mapped, you have an understanding of what's where, and you also now have a sense of all sorts of information kind of backing that up and understanding where you may be vulnerable. And so these next couple of slides, I want to talk a little bit about, okay, so what do you do about it, right? And so when we think about some of the things you can do, if you think about the data that Brian described and how we pull data into our solutions, the data is the foundation where these prescriptive analytics are layered on top and really help you more easily glean these insights and be able to take action on different things. So, for example, you're seeing on the left-hand side an asset risk matrix to help prioritize decisions. And we also help enable you to get to the root cause of issues with insights into how your controls are performing. And you see some of that on the right-hand side. And really, what we see the benefit there is the same vulnerabilities don't need to keep recurring and taking up your team's time and attention if you're able to get to that root cause and really remediate at I would say almost that deeper strategic level. In terms of how else we can assist, let me move over to the next slide. So remediation issue tracking. As you're working to develop your remediation strategy, we help you establish these scalable processes to manage efforts with your team. So you can see here, you're able to assign and track issues to be able to understand where efforts are happening and understand that progress. Brian, I'll quickly pause. Anything you want to add in terms of, talking about, implementing remediation in terms of control, root issue, or issue tracking?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Olivia. It's important to think about this kind of as a two-speed problem. One is, to the extent that you have issues, you want to be able to reduce those issues. So if you have misconfigurations that are leading to insecure outcomes and exposures, you want to be able to say, okay, we want to reduce those in this much time. It takes time to do that. You have to find the right person. You have to make sure you're aligned with change windows and all of that. So this tool will help you track that. But we also want to help up-level the conversation and help you be able to have a conversation that's not just about fixing this particular issue, but understanding what might be the root cause and what might be the controls that can help you reduce this issue more strategically, so that as you're fixing this issue, somebody else in your company isn't kind of creating a new instance of it. And so it's just as important to be able to think about the control improvement as the tactical reduction of the exposure.
Awesome. Thanks for adding that thought there. And so now we move to talking about the extended attack surface. And if you remember at the beginning, I alluded to this in the form of it's really important to focus on your organization's attack surface, but there is also a layer in terms of managing efforts with the vendors and the vendor ecosystem that you may partner with. And so what we also help with is reducing risk across that extended digital footprint, being able to leverage continuous monitoring to track changes, prioritize responses, optimize team efforts, and overall drive that more effective risk reduction. And so within our solutions, we help make it easy for you to understand your portfolio's performance at any moment and identify changes in risk as they occur. So there's really no need to, sometimes people will wait for the annual reassessment to find out if something bad has happened. And really with what we can offer from a portfolio risk matrix and alerts that can be configured to match your specific policies, we help arm you with a simple toolkit for prioritizing your team's focus and responding to security events that may put your organization at risk.
Yeah, I think.
In addition, oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to drill on this a little bit more. I think what we see now is more and more organizations and more CISOs thinking about their vendor network or their digital supply chain as not much different than whatever the infrastructure is that you run directly from a security perspective. Like the type of business activities that are happening in these digital vendors is often not much different than the types of business activities that are happening in the infrastructure that you may control and run yourself. And so like more and more the security controls and the types of analysis that you want to be able to do to ensure that you have a strong posture relates not just to your own organization where you have direct control, but to your supply chain and to these vendors. This platform, what's great about doing this from an external attack surface management point of view is you can really apply the exact same level of visibility that you have against your own organization across this entire supply chain. So it's not just a matter of, asking for qualitative answers in questionnaires and things like that. You can have, detailed evidence-based conversations about specific exposures within your supply chain, and which Olivia's going to talk about in just a minute. You have the ability to actually take action to remediate those things, which helps to significantly reduce the overall organizational risk in a way that's not possible if you're just looking at the infrastructure that you control.
Yep, exactly. Speaking of taking action, we help prioritize your team's focus and actually in terms of responding to security events that could put your organization at risk. There's various built-in collaboration tools to help proactively remediate vulnerabilities that you don't necessarily control when it comes to your vendors, but again, really giving you the tools to make that process more efficient and remain on top of these different risks that may ultimately have some type of level of impact on you.
I think one thing we saw here with some of these high-profile vulnerabilities that happened in the last couple of years, if you think about the Log4j or the Outlook or Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities, and similar ones, we saw organizations, really leaping into incident response mode and wanting to understand what's my exposure for my organization, and then what's my exposure in the supply chain. And I think as fast as people are trying to go, the process is very cumbersome today, especially across the supply chain. You have to figure out, which of your vendors you might want to reach out to. You blanket everybody with some survey and make them respond, or you reach out in a more targeted fashion. How do you collate the information when it comes back? How do you report that up to stakeholders who are asking, like, what's our exposure to Log4j? It's been out there for a week. I want to understand this. This tool lets you do that at huge scale. It's very easy. Like as soon as the vulnerability happens, you're able to look and see, okay, which systems in my organization may be vulnerable, which systems in my vendors are vulnerable. You're able to, from the platform, engage directly with those vendors, and so that you can invite them in, give them access to the tool at no cost to them. It'll show them exactly where, this is the IP address where there seems to be a vulnerability, and then give them an opportunity to respond. Like, we have a way to select a response or input a response to the customer, to you, to say, yes, we have this and we're planning to patch it next week, or no, there's a mitigating control here that means you don't have to worry about this. And that brings a level of automation to this process, which, like, heretofore, for most of these incident response processes for recent high severity vulnerabilities hasn't been possible. So taking an external attack surface management lens to this problem across the supply chain really can bring a lot of efficiency to the operation.
Thanks, Brian. All right, I'm actually going to pass it back over to you to get us into our summary.
Awesome. Thank you. So from just to kind of go over what our recommendations are here from an external attack surface management perspective. First of all, like you can't do it like you have to understand where your assets are. So you have to identify the assets and classify the assets to understand what it is that's out there. And external attack surface management tools are hugely valuable in doing that because they bring in kind of an outside-in check. It's not relying on any kind of information that you've compiled or reconciled across the organization. It's purely built as someone looking to attack your organization or someone looking to do reconnaissance on your organization would build their list. And so this allows you, these tools allow you to have a similar view and make sure you're kind of double checking all the efforts you have internally to identify and classify the assets. Once you have those assets, you want to think about analyzing the exposure and vulnerabilities. This is important because just the existence of the assets isn't a problem. Generally speaking, it's how well controls are in place to protect those assets. This is important both internally with your own assets and infrastructure, also important analyzing the assets and infrastructure of your key vendors and suppliers across the attack chain. The external attack surface management tools have a wide variety of capability to detect a lot of security things, a lot of issues across a wide range of security domains to help build your confidence that things are being managed well, that controls are functioning in a performant way. Most of security is about prioritization. So there are every tool you get will produce a list of things which could be fixed and worked on. It's really important to use the prioritization tools and to use a risk management process to prioritize what you want to fix, the things that are most likely to reduce risk and to reduce the likelihood of a bad outcome, and to kind of risk accept or to put in place controls to say, look, we don't care about these other things. Like these are the things which are going to move the needle, and these are the things which are going to create a lot of work and not really reduce our exposure. And so that prioritization is important. And again, like with analyzing the exposure and vulnerabilities and prioritizing, this is important across not just your own organization, but your extended attack surface and your vendor network and digital footprint. So digital supply chain. So it's really important to take this perspective, this external attack surface management perspective, and step back to see how it can help both your own processes and your vendor network. So Terry, I think at this point we hand it back over to you.
Brian, I want to thank you both for the really useful new insights into ways to monitor the attack surface, reduce risk, and keep users and networks more secure. Thank you both. Before we dive into the Q&A, I'd just like to direct the audience attention to the webinar survey that's at the bottom of the presentation window. Again, thanks in advance for your participation. The survey allows us to better serve you. So with that, we will head over to the Q&A. Brian, I imagine you get this question a lot, working with customers and prospective customers. You didn't really address in the presentation how much work it is to get started with external attack surface management. Maybe you could also address maybe some first steps as well, if an organization may be on the fence about if the approach is right for them and their requirements.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So as far as getting started, one of the nice things about this, as opposed to almost every other security technology, is that there's no real setup. There's no agents to install. There's no systems to integrate. There's no logs to collect. You can get a ton of value from this, even in a POC. You come, you log in, and when you log in, you get all the information. And just that can give you a sense of what the problem is here and how much value you're going to get from the system to go forward. So in terms of what kinds of organizations should try this, we have customers across the spectrum from, you know, 20 to 50 people in an organization to hundreds of thousands of people, and with infrastructures to match. I will say, I think that the larger the infrastructure, the harder it is to control, and the more value you get from having this external view. And so, generally speaking, I would say this is more relevant for larger organizations, like, you know, I'd say 500 employees and up is where you start to see real value, and we're like discovering things that people didn't anticipate with the tool. From there, like once you got started, though it's very easy to get started, from there we see people taking some steps to integrate the information. So people will integrate the findings from the external attack surface management tools, both the assets identified and the findings with other systems of record, with other security systems, with ticketing and incident response systems, to make sure that this is all plugged in and going through the normal security operations plumbing that are in place within the organization.
Thanks, Brian. We've got another question that I think is maybe getting at some integration challenges that occur not just in security, but across the IT ecosphere. How do you see external attack surface management working along with other security tools, say like vulnerability management?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think external attack surface management really complements vulnerability management program nicely. I think it really is a nice complement to vulnerability management. Vulnerability management is great in that you can detect a wide range of vulnerabilities. You can detect them with higher confidence because you have to configure the vulnerability manager. You have to point it at the systems you want it to assess. You have to build that asset footprint. You know, you have to build that infrastructure knowledge within the vulnerability management system, so it knows what the inventory looks like, and it knows where it's looking for vulnerabilities. If you've done all that, that's great, and you'll have a view into those systems. Where EASM really helps is making sure that the coverage is complete, that you have a true view into all the different parts of the organization, and that there aren't people somewhere, you know, deploying new infrastructure that you weren't aware of. I can tell you I've heard some, like, through working on this product and working with our customers, I've had some really interesting stories where people, I had one customer who acquired a business, had gone through due diligence on the acquisition, complete, you know, security screening during the due diligence process, integrated the company into the business, and then you opened our tool and realized they had an entire physical data center location they were unaware of. They just hadn't been, it like was a smallish organization. There was one person who was kind of maintaining it, and it was entirely outside of the control of the organization. So that, like, your vulnerability management program isn't going to help you with those situations where a tool like this really
Thanks for that. There's a related question here. I think we've opened the can of worms with can an external attack surface management program also help with more than just security? Do you see some, I hate to use the word synergies, but do you see some synergies across the enterprise with risk management beyond just the IT realm?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things that are going on, broadly speaking. One is in the direction of risk management, which you mentioned. We're seeing more and more people, more and more enterprise risk teams come to their CISO and CIO colleagues and say, hey, listen, there is interest from our regulators in cyber risk and quantifying cyber risk. There's interest in our board because of that. There's interest from our auditor because of that. So we really need to kind of raise the game when it comes to kind of governance and understanding our cyber risk. And external attack surface management can be a very powerful tool for helping to inform those kind of estimates, those cyber risk quantification estimates. In general, things like the bit site rating are tools which you can use to communicate to those stakeholders. So because we're doing this externally and we're collecting this on all of these, essentially everybody in the world, we can do things like benchmark. And not just, we did this controls assessment, these controls are green and these controls are red, but we have all of the security data about the actual security outcomes that are happening at these organizations, and here's how our organization falls and compares. And then you could use that input in a quantification analysis, which is something we don't talk about in this webinar specifically, but cyber risk quantification, being able to put a dollar value on that cyber risk can be easily informed by the data coming out of the analysis that you're doing with external attack surface management. So it's a really nice coupling there. The other place that's not strictly security, but in IT where we see use for this technology is really just in terms of like understanding the product footprint and looking for opportunities to consolidate vendors perhaps, or consolidate technologies, and making sure that people haven't circumvented the normal IT procurement process. So it's kind of like shadow IT detection. You can get a lot of that benefit from this, and that's useful from a security perspective, but can also be useful from a cost savings and consolidation perspective as well.
Thanks for that. Brian, it strikes me that no security conversation should avoid the topic of artificial intelligence, since it's very much on the minds of certainly people in the industry, customers, and the world at large, it seems. With something that's as process and maybe volume heavy as attack surface management, do you foresee a role for AI within attack surface management? Is it already there and already doing its thing? Is that expanding? Can you update us there?
For sure. We had the RSA security conference a few weeks ago, and seemingly everybody had an AI announcement or other. So I think it has huge potential. Like you said, we're dealing with huge volumes of data. We're trying to find meaning, and we're trying to do analysis to highlight what are the most meaningful parts to take action. And I think there's a lot that AI can offer to both like highlight those things and to make this more accessible to a wider range of people and stakeholders. I think there's still some research to be done. Like I think a lot of the things out the gate are interesting, but I am confident in a year's time, some of those like core use cases will start to emerge, and we'll start to see like much more productive use and much more like getting some of the scale and the promise of AI as a technology when it relates to these large data sets and attack surface management.
Excellent. Well, as it happens, that brings us to our time. I want to thank both Olivia Bilodeau and Brian Mulligan of BitSight. Information Week appreciates your time and expertise on today's topic. Again, thank you both.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for attending.
I also want to thank our sponsor, BitSight, as well as to everyone in the audience who participated today. We certainly appreciate your attention and participation. Within the next 24 hours, you'll be receiving a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. You're certainly welcome to invite your colleagues and peers who may not have been able to listen to today's event live. This webinar is copyright 2023 by Informa. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by Information Week and BitSight. Individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. On behalf of our guests, BitSight, I'm Terry Sweeney with Information Week. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.